Welcome to Garden Plants with Jim Putnam. Let's talk Carolina Sapphire Arizona Cypress. This is Cupressus arizonica, Carolina Sapphire, or Carolina Sapphire Arizona Cypress. These are typically used as screening plants, pretty fast growing screening plants. We'll talk more about that in a minute. It's obviously a blue-green evergreen plant, just amazing, beautiful coloration in the landscape. These can reach 40 to 50 feet in height and 15 feet in width. The spot that it's in right now, it will outgrow, but that's true of a lot of these large growing conifers that we use as screening plants in our landscape. It's shady enough over here that it'll probably limit itself up a bit in time and things can still be planted over here, but it is going to outgrow almost any space you put it in. Most people say this has a moderate growth rate, and I think that's a comparison with something like leyland cypress or green giant arborvitae. This thing grows very fast in comparison to almost everything else. This one was in a container in our garden here in Raleigh, and then it was put into this landscape this year. It was about my height, I think, when it went in the ground, and right now it's tipping 9 feet or so. So in the right place, it's actually very fast growing. These are native to the desert Southwest, and in that climate out west, I've seen them. They're kind of stunted because, it doesn't rain as much. You would think this is a plant that if you brought it east, it wouldn't care for water, but it's kind of the opposite. This thing really takes off and does fantastic in the southeast. These are hardy in zone 7 to 9 is typically what you're going to see them listed for, but I also think it's probably hardy in zone 6B, but I would spring plant them so they got some time in the ground before they go into winter. This is definitely a sun lover. Most of these big conifers like this want to be out in the sun, and no exception with this Arizona cypress. This one's in part shade, and you can see it has a bit of a thinner habit. It's going to stretch a bit here. It can be sheared to compensate for that. So we're not really growing these for flowers. We're growing them for other functions. It can be a windbreak if you're in a big open space and you need to create some wind blockage. Obviously, as a screen between you and a neighbor. The color of the foliage looks great contrasting against gold foliage, and just looks great in kind of a mixed screen with other interesting leaf shapes and leaf colors. It worked in a container for us for a year or two. It will grow out of a container, so keep that in mind, but it is an interesting blue conifer in a container for a short window, and then it needs to find a place in the ground. It's good for erosion control, and that's one of the reasons it's sitting in this space. This lot falls off like crazy. There's a full basement on this house, and in a very short period of time, it falls off probably 20 feet back here behind me. The roots here are going to help with the erosion on this bank. And then, again, screening plant. The main use for this plant is definitely going to be for screening you from a view from your neighbor's garden. I mentioned how this will tolerate more water than you would imagine from a southwestern plant, but it is extremely drought tolerant because it is from the southwest. And so this is a plant that you put in the ground, water it initially, and it's a plant that you could probably walk away from if you're in the southeast and you get periodic or regular rainfall. This thing can live on less than a foot of water a year. We get something like 45 to 50 inches a year here in Raleigh, so more than it would ever need, but that additional water does increase the rate of growth on it. Of course, it's incredibly heat tolerant, being a southwestern native, so you can put this one out in a really hot and dry location. It's tolerant of many different soil types, so whether you have sandy soils, clay soils, tolerant of different pH levels, really just a plant that can get along in almost any situation where you have a space that can take a very large growing evergreen. Arizona cypress really doesn't need to be fertilized. I mean, this is a plant that if I'm in my clay soils here in Raleigh, North Carolina, and it's established and it's growing, I may not sling any fertilizer under this. I'll keep mulch around it. I'll keep the weeds away from it. I think that's probably plenty. It's not a very demanding plant in that regard. If you want to fertilize it, you could fertilize it in the late winter, use some organic fertilizer. The other low maintenance thing for this is you really don't ever have to prune it, except for if you put it in too much shade like this one is. I think this one really does need to be sheared just a bit, and I would do that in the late winter or early spring. But if it's in a full sun area, they grow really tight and compact on their own without having to do any pruning on it. If you get a crazy limb coming off the side of it, you can cut that off whenever. But general pruning in the late winter, early spring. These are disease, insect resistant. In the deep south where we have more humidity, the more humidity you have might bring on some disease issues, but unlikely if it's in good open air movement and not, positioned where it's going to stay wet all the time, or you're over irrigating it or something like that. These are considered deer resistant, and that's one thing about this plant. It does have an interesting odor to it. And on warm days when it's putting on new growth, I can really smell it. And so, when you go to buy your Arizona cypress, and this is a great plant to use as a screening plant, really great plant, do rub the branches and smell it, see if it's something you can tolerate, because occasionally there are certain days of the year where you can smell it from a long way away and not just being right up close to it. But it's kind of an interesting odor. But that odor is great if you have deer. Typically fragrant foliage is your friend if you have deer problems. So there you go. This is Carolina Sapphire Arizona Cypress, one of my absolute favorite screening plants. Thanks for watching.